2,000 years of border history.
Low, they were good. Just one problem, they were still joined together. Instead of a clean break, clear blue water, a geological fault line, instability, and earthquakes. But they were nothing to write home about. Just little ripples on the Richter scale, little rattles of the porcelain in the dresser. Nothing that would allow you to get a big insurance claim in. But as the main earthquake zone in Great Britain, the geology here suggested that the borderland between England and Wales was never likely to be a peaceful area. BBC Wales presents The Noble Border, a brief history of 2,000 years of conflict and confabulation without the boring bits. And your host for tonight, Wales' most popular broadcaster, Mr. Roy Noble. They've been arguing about the borders for thousands of years, at least as far back as the Celts. So what kind of people were the Celts then? Well, they were divided into tribes. You had the Demetai, the Silures, and around here you had the Cornovi. They were the unitary authorities of their day, and sometimes reorganization came to them, sometimes it was forced, because professional rivals in those days not only tried to stab you in the back, they tried to do it in the front as well. This is Old Oswestry Hill Fort, and in this fort there were about 100 souls with their cattle and their essential requirements.
Camping the Celtic way. These happy Iron Age Celts are certainly made of the right metal. After a hard day on the border, relaxation around the fire and the traditional crafts, weaving, pottery, and baby cubs too. But it's soon time to put on a brave face, for when Johnny Roman moves in, that can mean only one thing: irregular conjugations. And that's certainly no holiday.
The Celts didn't take the Roman invasion lying down, and here in the Stretton Hills, the Welsh borders saw their first bit of heroic action. There was this very brave fellow called Caratacus. Caradog to us Welsh. He really gave the Romans some sleepless nights, and some heavy day shifts as well. He was a full six-cylinder man. Now they do say that he had his last battle against the Romans here, Caer Caradog, Caratacus's camp. I have to say, if I was in the scaling army, by the time the boys would have been up there, I'd have been home by then. Whoa. Now, invading a country is one thing. Holding it is another. In the south, the Romans had Caerleon to look after the country. In the north, Chester was the lock to keep the place secure here. And eventually the Romans and Britons started to get on together. The Britons got used to all these new garrisons and towns that were being set up. The towns were somewhere to go on a wet Saturday, weren't they? The Romans took us into Europe. Over the 400 years they occupied Britain, to be British and to be Roman or European were one and the same thing. All was peaceful on the borders. The Romans revolutionized the way of life, with better transport, improved goods and services, better consumer choice. There were new concepts, of course, like armies, barracks, and shopping, and on Saturday afternoon, real entertainment. The amphitheater. Here we go then. In the red corner, it's Nobel. Except that these places didn't have corners, did they? Could be anything, really. Hyde Park, Straddy, Old Trafford, Anfield, you name it. Whatever is your choice. And that's where the similarity stops. To be bottom of the league here meant being top of the menu for the Tigers, the Lions, and a whole host of wild beasts summoned up for the occasion. Facing the Pontypool front row of old, there was nothing compared with the stars of the amphitheater.
Certainly the Romans brought civilization to this part of the world. We had central heating, we had rainproof togas, we had baths communal, we had tiles on the floor coloured. And the Britons were really getting into this. After 300 to 400 years of Roman rule, they were even getting into the language in a poetic license kind of way, with shouts of Melita domi adsu, hello love, I'm home, and mensa secunda mia flagrat. What's happened to my second course here? My pudding's on fire. But in the end, it was a question of hodie adsit cras absit, here today, gone tomorrow, because the faxes were coming in fast and furious from Rome. There was bother. Never mind the rim, let's get back to the center here. The barbarians are not exactly at the gate, but they're coming down the road. There may be trouble ahead. There may be trouble ahead.
The lights were going out all over Europe. Rome was in uproar. The film was flickering, and the extras weren't well paid either. It was time then for the far-flung army to return and help the territorials, and leave the Britons to defend themselves. The Britons pleaded, "You can't do this to us. We've got enemies of our own, you know." But the Romans replied, "Much as tough us. We're otherwise engaged." The borders then were once again going to be plunged into turmoil.
Have the chance. Let's face the music and dance.
Mr. Good, right away!
Soon we'll be without.
Oh, the relief. Clearly there weren't many 7 3/8 in those days. This was Britain in the Dark Ages. In fact, so dark was it that there weren't many areas above 40 watt at all. Vortigern was king in North Wales, and through a friend of a friend down the club, he'd met a few Saxons, you know what it's like. So he thought he'd hire them, short-term contract, to kick out the Irish and the Picts. Very successfully. Unfortunately, the leaders of the Saxons were Hengist and Horsa. Now, these were not a cabaret act. These were short-fused men, and under the banner of a pillage a day keeps the doctor away, and just about everybody else as well, they decided, it's comfortable here, we'll stay. So, it was time for Superman to come and save the country. Arthur, saving the country time. Arthur.
He's rough, he's tough, he's a man with a leopard skin, and a cruel sense of mistiming. David Larry Jameson presents Arthur, Man of Destiny. He's racy, he's pacey, he's the king. Don't call him Mr., call him Myth. Catch him if you can at a war zone near you. Arthur, Man of Destiny.
Arthur did his bit, but he couldn't do it all. He disappeared in the end. Rumour has it that he's somewhere in Wales in a cave with a bell at the entrance, and if we ring that bell, he'll know Wales is in danger, and he'll come thundering out to save us all. We have rung once or twice, but it's always been engaged.
With Arthur gone, the borders were starting to look very frayed indeed.
Later, Edwin, King of Northumbria, really put the boot into the Welsh. His size 9s caused us some bother. But then a saviour, Cadwallon, King of North Wales, came along and certainly put a full stop in Edwin's conversation. Took his head off. Wales 1, England 0. However, as soon as things were going well for Cadwallon, confidence is that feeling you get just before you fall flat on your face. Along came Edwin's successor, Oswald, and he severely interfered with Cadwallon's breathing. How's that for a tonsillectomy, he said. Cadwallon, gone. England won, Wales won. Then, in the game, things got very complicated indeed, and the pools were thrown into disarray because Oswald was done in by some of his English compatriots near Oswestry. A spectacular own goal.
Confused by all this cross-border skullduggery? So were the Dark Age Welsh and English. So much so, in fact, that one man decided to do something about it. It was an uphill struggle, but he was determined to keep the Welsh in their place, with a kind of Berlin Wall.
Offa, King of Mercia, was Mr. Big in this area, and nothing was too hot or too heavy for him. Good grief, he'd murdered his father-in-law and sanctified him, and that fellow was family. So what was he going to do about the Welsh then? Keep them in the West. And then it came to him. Bedside reading. He picked up a book by the Venerable Bede called The History of the English Church. Not many pictures in the book, but there it was. The tale of how the Romans built walls to keep the Scots and the Picts out. And he thought, well, I haven't got blocks for a wall, but a quick ditch, a bit of a rampart, and Bob's your uncle. I've got a dike.
Running from Prestatyn to Chepstow, Offa's Dyke was the first physical marker of the border, keeping the English or the Welsh at bay, depending on your point of view. And the border it marks out is very similar to the one we have today, but it was to go through several public inquiries and adjustments before it finally settled down. After only 200 years, it was the Normans who were the first to challenge it. The Norman Development Agency were keen on expansion. After winning their away match at Hastings, they pressed their advantage and moved westwards. It took a couple of years to reach the Welsh border, but once there, the whole country was up for grabs.
Mais oui, all you happy Normans, opportunity knocks in the Baie de Chanson. See Wales and kill people. Get to wear the latest fashions, try out the latest access. For any garçon with the itchy bit and the sense of adventure, Wales can be yours, yours, yours. Get your informations back now.
When the Normans had finally got to the borderlands here, now and again of an evening they'd settle down and look towards the setting sun and think, my word, what a lovely view. I wouldn't mind a piece of that. So the day trip started, then the weekend excursions, then more permanent aspirations and journeys. And if you're thinking permanent, you've got to think in those days, castles, something substantial, because the locals were bemused, but they weren't entirely without grey matter. They knew what was going on. And of course, castles, an essential stepping stone towards invasion. Every lord worth his salt had to have a castle, but not to be too pretentious too soon. You had to get him up quickly and follow the medieval estate agent's creed, really. Verily in planning, pray do not gloat. Privy plan castle, but start with a fort.
Castles were springing up everywhere. There are hundreds of castles in the borderlands, more than anywhere else in Britain. They range from starter 2-up and 2-down dungeons to heavily fortified mansions. Most Norman lords had more than one castle and moved between them. It's quite handy of a weekend if we were having one decorated to have somewhere else to go to. This was the secret of the expansion of the borders. From being a simple defended marker, it grew into an entire country, the Marches, a buffer zone between England and a shrinking independent Wales. The Marcher lords ruled with a fist of iron. But when the Welsh princes reclaimed territory, it got a bit confusing for the Welsh peasants. They didn't know where they stood, how they stood, or whether they were allowed to stand there anyway.
Wales had its own laws, some very enlightened and some just plain eccentric. For instance, in a skirmish, if you lost a tooth, it was great news. In compensation, you could have one of these cows, you see, and also 20 pennies. Play your cards right, and for the full set, you could have an entire herd. Oh yeah, in market forces, the tooth fairy didn't have a prayer.
And the fighting wasn't all just man to man. Sometimes it was woman to man. And as ever, the Welsh were at the forefront of women's rights.
So the question was, ladies, are you getting tired of your husband? Is he getting a bit leprous? Is he smelly? Are his habits around the house a bit, unsavoury? And what about those warm nocturnal moments? Is he complaining a lot of headaches? No problem. Get yourself a quickie divorce. You get to keep half the house, and then off, meet another man.
And what about animal rights?
Somebody killed or maimed your cat? Hey, there's a plus side here. Just hang the cat up by the tail. Don't worry about it. Then get them to pour grain over the cat until it is completely covered. You get to keep all the grain. And the cat.
No.
Eccentric maybe, but at least the Welsh system was consistent. Ooh, the Marcher lords all had their own set of rules. If you transgressed in one area, all you had to do was to move to another area, pay fourpence for his protection, and Bob's your uncle. You had a clean sheet. Oh yes, in terms of law and order, the borders were rather edgy.
It took over 200 years to complete the job, but the English finally took over all of Wales and put up yet more castles. They also set up towns and boroughs, and these created a whole new set of borders between where the Welsh could and couldn't go. The English lived comfortably in the towns where the Welsh were locked outside. The Welsh were exiles then in their own land. It was time for a new border hero.
The medieval Welsh then could but live in hope. No, they couldn't. This was a prime example of the boroughs set up by the English along the borderlands at the time. The burghers here were very nervous of the Welsh, and there were some right burghers about at the time. Now, the Welsh could come here and have their own little market, but they weren't allowed to take an Englishman to court. They weren't allowed to own any land within 3 leagues of the borough, and they weren't allowed either to brew any beer within 3 leagues of the borough, which made the mood rather dark and not a little bitter. So, blessed is he who expects nothing, for you shall not be disappointed. Well, the Welsh were blessed there. They didn't have many rights in this area. There's a tale of one Roger ap Iorwerth, who in good faith bought 50 acres of land in this area, but he wasn't allowed to keep it, you see. Why? They said, you're a Welshman. You're not allowed to buy English land in the first place anyway. So things were getting rather irritating, and every itch will need a scratch in the end. Race relations were bad, time was running out. The Welsh actually got together, and one fella asked, do you know of anybody who might be able to help? And another Welshman said, well, I've been reading a lot about this Owain Glyndŵr. Bit of a boy, direct action man, really. Send to him. Down he came with the boys, took out his matches, burnt the borough. Hope, gone.
The time was ripe to reclaim Wales for the Welsh, and Owain was the man for the job. He had the qualifications, royal blood in his veins and so on, and the Welsh were ready to follow their new hero, and even call him Prince of Wales. All they needed now was a cunning plan, a strategy. This is how it happened, you see. Owain was here at Pilleth, the Battle of Pilleth, fighting Mortimer over there. Now, Mortimer had a lot of Welshmen fighting for his side, but they suddenly changed sides. Don't know why. Better working conditions, shorter fighting hours, perhaps. Better bonuses for a win on a Saturday. Whatever it was, they changed sides, and Owain won. Now, we said to Mortimer, now you've got a choice here. Things could get very nasty, or you could marry my daughter.
Now, she wasn't that ugly, so he thought, well, I'll take the easy option, join the family firm. So there they were, Glendower and Mortimer Incorporated. Then the idea came, let's expand. Let's make it an eternal triangle, because up here was Percy fighting in the north. He'd been trying to oust Henry IV down here. In turn, Henry IV had in fact ousted Richard II. There was a lot of ousting and jousting going on in those days. The idea was, you see, once they finally got together in the committee, 1, Percy would have the north. 2, Mortimer would have the south. And in the west, the whole of Wales would be Owain Glyndwr's. He'd be ecstatic.
Yes, things are going swimmingly at this moment in the 15th century, and there's no doubt that Owain Glyndwr is the man of the moment. Yes, Taffy may be a Welshman, but it's not a leg of beef he's after this time. He'd be mad for that. It's an entire castle. He's a dab hand with the siege engines, and it's not long before he has the whole of Wales eating out of his hand. Then it's back to the club to celebrate.
According to the master plan, the border would be pushed back well beyond Offa's Dyke, as far as the River Severn. Whole swathes of Shropshire, Worcestershire and Herefordshire were going to be reclaimed for Wales. Great news and job security for the atlas makers of the time. But then, things went horribly wrong. Percy got killed. Mortimer died of starvation. And Owain only just managed to escape with his own life. His border home at Sycharth was burned to the ground. And Owain lost family, friends and influence. And so, he stole away into the land of myth and legend.
The border went back to what it was, with the martial lords ruling the roost. After Owain Glyndwr's failure in the rebellion, the position of the Welsh was now even worse than it had been before. But it wasn't a bed of roses for the king either. Oh no, Edward IV had some trouble there because the martial lords were being very, very cocky. And then he thought, I'll set up a committee. Perhaps it'll spawn a subcommittee. What ecstasy. So he set up the Council of the Marches here in Ludlow. Order. Order. Hey, what do you think? A noble home at last. This is definitely my size, and I'm very comfortable with the colour. And how about those knuckle dusters as a hedge against inflation? Still, back to the tale. Hip hip hooray, rejoice and sing, a Welshman made it up as king. Plantagenets out, Tudors in. But it's true, isn't it? As soon as someone's offered the foreman's job, they change, don't they? It was the same with the Welsh Tudors. When the blood trickled down to Henry VIII, shenanigans set in. He began local government reorganisations. He brought in then the Act of Union to join England and Wales, and Wales and the Marches were run from Ludlow. But they started fiddling about with the border. Sections were given to England. Monmouthshire went entirely, and we didn't even get it back till 1974. Here it is then, the Welsh office. Well, it was for a while. For 200 years, Ludlow was more or less the capital of Wales. Here the Lord President sorted everything out. They had a lovely Christmas too, apparently. All the illegal eagles flapped in here. If they weren't invited, they were very, very worried indeed. He'd sort things out like, is the water in Holywell really holy? If not, knock it down. Are all the people in Wales of the right faith? If not, why not? What about the cattle in Wales? Very mangy recently. Now, improve the quality. And what about the ale as well? We've got to have someone to improve the quality of the beer. There was a right fight in the job centre for that responsibility.
Soon, lawyers, criminals and plaintiffs were coming in droves from Wales to Ludlow to have it out with the authorities. This Welsh outpost could even offer luxury accommodation for all the lawyers who came here from over the border. Ludlow remained the capital of Wales for over 200 years. This meant prosperity for the town. But in the days of William and Mary, all business was transferred back to London. Mind, that didn't make it any easier for the Welsh to get justice, especially where the border was concerned.
The Act of Union made English and Welsh equal, but some were more equal than others. They were the dark days when every Welshman was a taffy and every taffy was a thief. In the enlightened age of the 18th century, legislation was actually brought in to make it legal to shoot a Welshman on a Friday. And in the Recognition of Borders Act 1772, they dealt with the vexing problem of bringing untaxed goods into market illegally on weekends. Sure enough, 4 years later, 7 Welshmen were killed. 3 were shot, 3 were stabbed, and 1 was bludgeoned to death with his own produce. Apparently, the act has never been repealed.
So, the Welsh border was once a kind of Wild West frontier. A lawless place where a man was a man, and if he was wise, he'd keep one eye on his inclination and the other eye on his weapon.
Of course, things are different now. Quite a bit of this. Thank you very much. I'm hanging around the bar. Not good sometimes. Mind you, in the old days, hanging around this bar meant something else entirely. It was something that tended to go with the territory. Know what I mean? You don't? Come with me then. They had an odd line in entertainment here. When things were going with a swing, it was rather dire for some. And when the shout went up of 180, it was nothing to do with darts. It was to do with the number of men who ended their days here, hanging, courtesy of Judge Jeffreys. A fine borderman himself. He's from Wrexham. But there weren't many laughs about JJ. He went at his work like a lynching marshal come judge. He had missionary zeal that made Genghis Khan look like a Betterware salesman. And they do say, down these stairs, there's a black shadow, a ghostly figure. Probably there's a group of them. Stories then from the edge, the borderlands, caused by Hang-em-High Jeffreys, who brought order to this land here, but also probably had shares in hemp for the rope. Of course, the borders have come a long way since then. Everyone knowing their place, the Welsh and the English happy with their lot, and those living on the border, well, not bothered one way or the other, really. I suppose the biggest change over recent years was Sundays, when Wales was dry and England was wet. Welsh pubs closed, English pubs open, and the border really came into its own then, because it was just a question of nipping over from Wales for a little refreshment. Speaking of which, replenishment. Make my man 1 pint of Welsh bitter and a bourbon chaser from the Appalachians.
Sorry, we called time 5 minutes ago.
Time? What time is that? This is Wales, you know. We run after Greenwich time here. I feel a nasty border incident coming up here. Now, Mike, I'm very short, but I'm potent. I don't have a black belt in judo, but I got a dark grey one.
No chance.
Come on! You're some mother's son. What do your mother think of you now? Do you know I suffer from dehydration? My doctor says I've got to have my liquids.